In the Easy Time Clock system, there are 4 options for tracking unpaid breaks or lunches. Having the employee clock out, then back in upon return, break and lunch buttons, lunch deductions, and auto lunch deductions. Some companies have employees clock out when they go to lunch and then back in when they return. However, if you are wanting to specify lunch or break times on the time card, you can set them up in the Breaks Lunch page under Features. By creating a lunch or break, you are adding a button to the time cards that will be placed between clock in and clock out. Here, we have created a paid break and an unpaid lunch. Whether it is paid or unpaid can be specified in the pay type column. Although paid is labeled as break and unpaid as lunch, they are interchangeable. If you want to track an unpaid break, set the pay type to lunch unpaid. Just make sure the report display and button are called break. The break types column is used for 2 purposes. For paid breaks, this will tell the system how much of the break you will pay for. If an employee takes 17 minutes on this 15-minute break, only 15 minutes will be paid. For unpaid lunches, you can utilize the break times and min return columns to require employees to fulfill at least a portion of their break before they are allowed to clock back in. So if your break time is set to a half hour and your min return is set to 50%, the employee will need to be clocked out on their break for 15 minutes before the clock in button reappears on the time card. Break and lunch buttons cannot be reused throughout the day. Once used, the button will disappear for the rest of the day. However, if your employees are using a reader, all breaks and lunches can be reused throughout the day. Clicking Next at the bottom will take you back to the same Assign page that is used for projects. If all employees receive all breaks and lunches created, you can keep the drop-down set to everyone. If break, lunch, or project assignment varies among employees, set to individuals and assign accordingly. Make sure to never set the default project to a break or lunch, as this is probably not what you'll want your employees clocking into by default. Once you have created breaks and lunches, they will be available for you to use when editing time cards. Be aware, the breaks and lunches feature we have just gone over is not a deduction. If you want to enter a lunch manually, you cannot just add a line for lunch. Rather than a deduction, think of lunch as an unpaid project. Simply adding a line for a lunch hour only adds unpaid time on top of the time worked. To enter a lunch manually, you will want to make sure the employee is clocked out of work entirely during the lunch period. The lunch deduction feature is used only for manual time card editing. As opposed to the break buttons, the lunch deduction option will actually deduct from the daily total hours without requiring a time frame for the employee to be clocked out. By default, the edit page will offer the most common deduction options, 30 minutes and 1 hour. But you can activate more options to populate by going to the General Setup Options page under Setup. In the Time Card Edit section, choose which deduction amounts you want to show as options in the Edit page. The option for any lunch allows you to customize the deduction upon entering it. Let's go ahead and choose a few, including any lunch. Now, to enter a deduction in the Edit page, you will want to start out in the New Time Card section. Never change an existing line on the time card to a deduction line. We want to add a new line altogether. Let's say in this example, the employee took a 36-minute lunch, but forgot to clock out for it. Make sure you are set to the correct date for your new line, then skip over to Entry Style and choose Any Lunch. Under Hours, enter 36 minutes, or 0.6 in decimal. There is no need to set the project to a lunch. Just choose whatever the employee was clocked into, so that 36 minutes can be deducted from their work. The last lunch option is auto lunch under Features. This feature deducts a predetermined amount of time based on a minimum requirement of hours clocked under a single time punch. For example, if we set up a half hour to be deducted after 6 hours, the employee will have to have 6 uninterrupted hours of work for the lunch to deduct. If the employee clocks out for a break or switches projects, the last time punch will reset the 6 hours. You may instead want to add time if a certain amount of hours are worked. This can be good for the California meal periods law that adds an hour of time to the time card if the employee went longer than 5 hours without a break. Up to 2 auto lunches can be created for each employee. Another thing to note about auto lunch is that the deduction is triggered by the action of clocking out. So if your employee forgets to clock out and you have to enter a clock out time manually, you will also need to add in a manual lunch deduction.